Hello, all. Welcome to another episode of The Manly Catholic. I am James, your host, and with me we have a very special guest, Dr. Kevin Vost, who just came out with a new book called You Are That Temple, a Catholic Guide to Health and Holiness. So, Kevin, thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to The Manly Catholic.
Well, oh, sorry, James. Things froze up on my end for a little bit. So,
can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, perfect. Well, I just welcoming you to the show. Thanks for taking the time to join us on The Manly Catholic.
Oh, hey, it's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me, and I just love that title.
Well, I think what we're talking about tonight is kind of right up the alley of that. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation to discuss your new book. But before we dive into that, we'll start with a word of prayer, and we'll start with the St. Michael prayer. So start in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. St. Michael, the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly hosts, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world, seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Now, Kevin, I will kick this over to you to start us off. Just give our audience, maybe who've never heard of you, never read any of your many books that you have written, just kind of give our audience a brief background, and we'll go from there.
Sure, I'd be happy to make a 61-year-long story very short in just a few minutes. I'm a guy who was raised a Catholic, went to Catholic grade school with wonderful Dominican sisters, Catholic high school with great Viatorian priests and brothers, and of course a lot of great lay teachers. My family went to church every Sunday as I was growing up, though we didn't really talk about the faith much at home. My childhood passion has always been bodybuilding and weightlifting. In the second grade, I saw a weightlifter on TV, and I demanded that my dad get me some barbells. In fact, even before that, I was obsessed with the Superman cartoon character. But once I was old enough to realize I could not be Superman, I settled on being a weightlifter. Anyway, I go through high school. I'm immersed in bodybuilding and weightlifting. One of my heroes at the time is a man named American Mensa, a Mr. Universe, who at the time they thought was going to take over from Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's a very, very bright man. I learn a great deal from him. I go to some of his seminars. I meet him in person, speak to him, consult with him over the phone. But he's also writing in the muscle magazines of all places, not only about fitness and training your body, but he's dabbling in philosophy. Through him, I meet philosophers like Friedrich Nietzsche, Ayn Rand, Bertrand Russell, these great atheists. And I'm actually pulled away from my faith by some of their arguments. I spend the next 25 years considering myself an atheist. During that time, I completed a doctoral degree in clinical psychology. I keep on my fitness pursuits. I compete in bodybuilding and powerlifting, Olympic weightlifting, tug-of-war competitions, Highland Games, where you put on a kilt and throw a caber, and all things like that. In my early 40s, through a series of events, I read St. Thomas Aquinas for the first time, and after 25 years, my atheism is gone, because now I'm reading the real philosophy. Realize those arguments that pulled me away from the faith were erroneous. Praise be to God, I come back to the church. Yeah, that was like almost 18 years ago now. So, since I came back in 2004, very first off, I realized my specialty area in psychology was memory and memory improvement. And Thomas Aquinas himself is considered one of the key figures in the history of human memory improvement techniques. So anyway, from that, I write a book called Memorize the Faith for Sophia Press. The years after that, I've written, I think, 25 books since then, and a few more are in press. And they've all, in one way or another, borrowed from the wisdom of St. Thomas Aquinas, and they all pulled from even my secular learning, my training as a psychologist, my experience in the fitness world. So anyway, I sit here now, retired after a 32-year career in disability evaluation, physical and mental, and a part-time career as a college psychology professor. So now I just sit here in my study and drink coffee and read books of St. Thomas Aquinas and write books. And I'm blessed to be able to do things like podcasts with folks like you.
Well, don't forget the old fashions, Kevin. I saw that in your book. You like the old fashions.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, I do write my book. that I usually have a couple of old fashions each day with whiskey or brandy. And I even kiddingly told my wife, I said, I wrote in that book about those old fashions, so I better have a couple before I go on tonight.
It's only
And
natural.
I actually did. It's only natural. I actually did. I had one with whiskey, one with brandy. I don't put any sugar in there because I want these to be healthful elixirs. But anyway, yeah, I try to live a balanced life. And I'm here with my wife now. We have 2 sons that are grown. We have 5 grandchildren. So a pretty full life that includes some of life's simple pleasures like little old-fashioned cocktails, but never in excess.
Absolutely. Always in moderation, right? So I do have to ask, Kevin, these Highland Games, are there clips of you in these kilts in the Highland Games that you competed with?
That's an interesting question. I don't know that there's any moving video clips. I have occasionally on social media posted somewhere I'm in my kilt. And one of them is kind of audacious. I remember from one of my indoor events, it was on St. Patrick's Day at our Illinois State Fairgrounds out in this Coliseum where it was frigidly cold. I'm wearing my kilt, which is the Irish national tartan, they call it. It's a green and yellow and white kilt. And I got this gigantic Superman sweatshirt on top. And the reason it's gigantic is it was so cold I had about 6 layers of shirt underneath it. So there's a few pictures out there. But yeah, I did that mostly in my early 40s, about 20 years ago. And it was a whole lot of fun. You toss the caber, you throw different weights, and it's just a lot of fun.
Oh, that sounds like it. That's wonderful. And you couldn't quite be Superman when you were younger, but you decided to wear the Superman shirt and sweatshirt. So it all came full circle.
That's right.
So, but no, so you mentioned, St. Thomas Aquinas, and that's actually, we were talking briefly before, that's where I first met you or heard about you was on actually Matt Fradd, Pints with Aquinas and the Memory Palace. And it was fascinating. You were walking him through how to memorize the 10 Commandments through, the Memory Palace. So I have not read your book on the Memorize the Faith, but it's something that I'm definitely interested in. And I think you have one, Memorize the Mass, too. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's actually led to a series. That Memorize the Faith came out in 2006. And after that came Memorize the Reasons on Apologetics for Catholic Answers, Memorize the Mass for Unroutbooks, Memorize the Latin Mass, and most recently even Memorize the Stoics. It has some Stoic philosophical principles. But yeah, actually, my master's thesis back in 1990 was on memory strategies for use with school children, adolescents, and all. And then my doctoral work at an Alzheimer's center was testing the memory of people with dementia, various brain injuries, and also normal elderly controls so we could see what happens to your memory and other abilities as you age. And I did a little bit of memory work there with particular patients with brain damage. So yeah, memory area, again, was just happened to be one of my specialty areas in psychology that I was able to put into the service later for the church, but partly because my main man, St. Thomas Aquinas, and his great teacher, St. Albert the Great, were 2 key figures in passing on knowledge about how the human memory works and how to perfect it.
Fascinating. I think we'll have to have you back on just a whole podcast on memory because that is fascinating to me as well. And I work with folks who have dementia quite a bit. So I seek a lot of that with my profession. So, but no, Kevin, I mean, one reason why I really wanted you to come on and this book, it really was kind of God that I think I mentioned after I heard you on Matt Fradd's show, Sophia Press reached out to me and was like, hey, Dr. Kevin has this new book coming out on fitness and nutrition. Would you be interested in having moms? I go, this is perfect because, as men, especially as Catholic men, obviously the spiritual warfare aspect is something that we engage in and go to battle. But in order to be able to be spiritually fit, you have to be physically fit as well. So I think your book ties, and I love how you tie in the physical with the spiritual aspect and the mental part of it as well, and all integrated into our Catholic faith. And you do it in a way that I find very easy to digest, especially someone who has a science background. I mean, you could have expanded into super nerdy literature, and I'm sure you would have loved to do that, but you made it very easy to digest. So I appreciate that you did that. So going to my 2 icebreakers, so to speak. The first one I always like to ask, if you could be the patron saint of anything, what would it be and why?
Ooh, now that one is a doozy. I'm interested in a lot of things, and I have a lot of saints who are patrons of some things I'm interested in. But especially talking about tonight's theme And boy, it seems kind of presumptuous to even imagine myself as a patron saint. One of the books I was asked to write about was humility, so I'm really hesitant to even think about this. But maybe perhaps I would say that this new book is called You Are That Temple. If I could be some kind of a patron of tending the bodily temple, or a patron saint of strength and health, not that I totally mastered them, but I would like that. That's one of my major interest is showing how our bodies, our physical bodies, are a great gift from God, and we can honor him by trying to take care of them as best we can.
Oh, amen. And I think the book really puts that forth too, all the verses you quote about the importance of the body and taking care of the temple. So you definitely hammer that in relation to our faith and the importance of the body too. And so I think I may have a hint of what this next one's going to be, but if you could sit down with anyone, dead or alive, and have a drink with them, who would it be and why?
Okay, now this is a much easier one. Yeah, for me, it would be St. Thomas Aquinas, because he had such a major impact on me personally. And when I read him, part of the reason he drew me back, I had a doctorate in psychology, but I always loved philosophy. And I found that he'd answered all these arguments of the atheists, that I thought were unanswerable. Boy, they're sitting there in Thomas Aquinas for 700 years. I didn't even know it. He's also a master psychologist. He wrote about things like memory, but also how sensation, perception, cognition, how we think, how we reason, how we make judgments. And boy, is he spot on there. He's so brilliant in all that. But of course, most importantly, he's a great saint, a master of the church history, church doctrine, the church fathers, of scripture itself, inflamed with love for Jesus. So when I read Thomas, I'm always often amazed at, he answers questions that I would never have thought to even ask, and he incorporates so much material. It's just astounding. So to me, it'd be to sit across the table from him, with a beer, or perhaps with an old fashioned, introduce him to that drink, but just to see how he would interact in one-on-one simple conversation would just be astounding to me.
Well, the one thing I really appreciate about St. Thomas Aquinas too is that he takes the other person's argument and he builds it up stronger than they ever could. Steelmans it versus, the straw man, if you want to go philosophical language. And that's something that, especially nowadays, it just does not happen. It's all about name calling, straw manning, and, I don't like your argument because I don't like you type of thing, which is totally against what St. Thomas Aquinas was about. Is no, let's look at the argument. Let's love the person, but look at the argument. And that's something I've always respected greatly about St. Thomas Aquinas. So,
that's so right. Yeah, that is so right. That's why it's so much needed in our day, where so few people are willing to really, truly listen to the other person. Because we have to think, when other people, the opinions they hold, what they do, somehow they make sense to them. So we should be willing to try to understand and see it from their perspective. And Thomas always did that. In fact, when I read his objections, the statements he starts with that disagree with what he's going to finally conclude, they are so well put together. I'm often thinking, that makes perfect sense, until he then, relays later what they're missing, how it's only a partial truth. So this in Thomas, the way he respects people with different opinions enough to be able to restate their arguments succinctly, sometimes even better than they stated them themselves, but then to respectively show, maybe where they got it right, but where they got it wrong. One of the true things I love about Thomas, and I do wish we had that more today, where people, do want to make those ad hominems against the person, attacks, or even try to keep people from speaking at all if they happen to hold a different opinion on things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's dive into your book now. So let's just kind of start with the general overview, because I know you said you're author of over 25 books. Mm-hmm. So what, I guess, drove you to write this book in particular? Because, there's so much information. You took on two of probably the most talked about topics in nutrition and fitness in our day and age. So what drove you to write it and kind of format the book the way you did?
Sure. In this particular topic, the intersection of faith and fitness, again, was always something important to me. Even in my years of atheism, I enjoyed some of the good secular philosophy, people like the Stoics and Aristotle, the ancient Greeks and Romans, who talked about a healthy mind and a healthy body, which is a valid thing to pursue. So over the years, I've written several books about fitness. The first, I was still an atheist, called Full Range of Motive. It involved interviews with people trying to get certified with personal training, just looking at the different reasons people get involved in fitness. Then when I came back to the faith shortly after, I wrote a book called Fit for Eternal Life for Sophia. That came out in 2007. So it kind of emphasized what I had learned at that point about integrating faith and fitness, with a strong emphasis on the exercise side of the equation and a strong emphasis on virtues, how fitness ties into virtues. Well, as the years went by, I wrote another book, a little devotional called Tending the Temple, with some friends, including co-authors, Peggy Bowes and Shane Kapler. We kind of did a day-by-day devotional that was both devoted to a saint, had spiritual lessons, but also physical lessons. So now, recently, the last couple of years, I continued to learn about faith and fitness, and I learned a lot, especially in regards to nutrition, where I had changed some of my previous ideas on nutrition that were based on kind of the common wisdom of the day. But I read new things, learned new things, tried new things that made me think, boy, I was wrong about some of the things I recommended in the past. I'd like to rectify that. So this book, You Are That Temple, kind of shows the culmination now of my 40-some years of involvement in health and fitness. So I cover both. There are the exercise chapters, but I also dig more. This book is far more nutrition heavy than any previous book was, because I found that that's what made the most significant difference to me at this point in my life, as I'm into my 60s, in the last couple of years or so.
Yeah, I mean, and like I mentioned too, as a physical therapist too, I mean, the patients that we see, I mean, I work with geriatrics all the time, and nutrition is, I know you talk about it in the book, and I really appreciate that you had a specific chapter or two chapters on, the aging population and kind of the lack of protein, especially that they get. I mean, I see that constantly with, I'm trying to educate them, increasing your protein intake and even just drinking water. It seems to be something that older generations are allergic to is drinking just pure water. So even just the basic things like that. So, I mean, I know with nutrition, like I said, there's so much. There you go. Speaking of, there's so much out there. You're welcome. That's what I'm here for. I am a physical therapist, so I do this all the time. So what, I guess, would be your opinion on the biggest misconception out there in nutrition? I know it's a very broad question, but I mean, there's so many fad diets out there, the DASH diet, the Atkins diet, keto diet. So what would you say is kind of the biggest misconception that people might think is common knowledge, but in fact is probably wrong?
Yeah, boy, and I got kind of two possibilities to narrow down here. One, I'm gonna cheat and kind of give you two. One is the idea that so much of what we see in our supermarket in those center aisles is food, when we should maybe think about that more as food-like substances or sort of foods. The other, I think, is, especially in the last 40 or 50 years, since our obesity and diabetes epidemics have exploded, is this idea that for most people, carbohydrate should form the foundation of our diet. Those are two things I've come to seriously question and to change my own practices and to show dramatic effects in terms of body fat level, waist circumference, blood pressure, lipid levels. So yeah, basically misconceptions are all this packaged stuff is actually food, and that we have to be taking in this vast amount of carbohydrate.
Yeah, no, in the early chapters too, you talk about the rise of obesity and the dangers, obviously, that entails. I know you dive deeper too into diabetes as well. So maybe give our audience a bit of background about, the rise of this, basically, pandemic, if you will, or epidemic, whatever you want to call it, of obesity and diabetes, and the correlation between those two, and why it's making such an impact on our society.
Yeah, it's really huge. And I noted in the book that it's the first book where I really brought this particular part of my background into play, where for 32 years, my job was in evaluation of mental and physical disability claims for Social Security, the Social Security Administration. I was working for a state agency, but we did the cases for the federal agency. And I saw many, many tens of thousands of cases throughout the years where I read people's in-depth medical records. But the years I was there, 82 to 2016, really paralleled, 1984 to 2016, really almost paralleled when we had this skyrocketing incidence of obesity. So for example, a few years before I started in the year 1980, it was estimated that about 15% of Americans, U.S. citizens, were obese. Now the latest numbers I heard are that it's 42%. So it's almost tripled. And if you throw in the category just what's considered overweight, it is almost 75%. Almost 3 out of 4 of us now are beyond the desirable body weights that we used to have. It said that I think that the average American adult now weighs about 25 pounds more than they did like when I was a young man. So I saw this in the disability claims. Obesity, a vast number of our cases were compounded by obesity. People had heart problems, diabetes, a variety of other problems, but they were complicated by the fact that they had these giant BMIs, body mass indexes, which really limited their ability to function. Along with that, has come just similar skyrocketing numbers in the prevalence of diabetes mellitus, especially the type 2, and even in children. And I know some of the experts tie all this into a phenomenon of insulin resistance within the body, and that some argue that these changes in our body that lead us to become more and more obese, to hold on to more and more fat, over time, the fruition is this diabetes, our body's inability to continue to handle vast amount of sugars, to keep shuffling it off to the fat cells. So then we often develop diseases like diabetes. Another one is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, where our livers become increasingly fat, which is another epidemic. So there's all kinds of health problems that we have seen in the last 40 or 50 years that actually, too, have coincided with significant changes in dietary recommendations in terms of that we should increase our carbohydrates. It also coincided with things like our cola beverage consumption going up and the manufacturers switching to this high fructose corn syrup in the 1980s. So there's a lot of things going on around the same time, increased consumption of seed oils, these processed oils that come from a manufacturing process. So I just saw a lot of things going on within the last several decades, these various epidemics that are just huge. I mean, it's amazing how fast they're growing. And not only in the US and around the world, but during the time I was a disability adjudicator and a trainer in that profession, I thought, wow, I even saw these firsthand. I saw thousands of individual peoples dealing with this that was just dreadfully impacting their own lives, rendering a lot of them just unable to work, to sustain themselves.
Yeah, and I want to talk to you too about fat. Okay, so in the book, you talk about the importance of fat, and it's been this big kind of elephant in the room where like fat, low fat diets is what helps you lose weight and things like that. And that used to be, especially with the USDA food pyramid, which I know you mentioned has kind of been debunked at this point with all the research that's coming out. So let's talk about, maybe you can touch on that, is why is fat so important and why was it labeled for so long as kind of the boogeyman of what causes us to get fat? Because we know now that is actually false information.
Yeah, and in the book I talk about what I call 3 keys, because one of them happens to be a person whose last name is Keys. But just, there's a variety of reasons. But one is just that, well, in our early guidelines pointed out this fact, that protein and carbohydrate each generate or produce about 4 calories per gram, whereas fat is about 9 calories per gram. So it's more calorie dense. For the same amount of fat, you get more calories, more bang for your buck. So early they said, well, reduce the fat in favor of carbohydrates. So you're going to have a much less calorie dense source. You're only going to get those 4 calories instead of 9 for every gram you eat. Another, I think, may relate to the fact that the fat in our food is the same word we use for the fat that's on our bodies. So people think, okay, we are what we eat. If I eat fat, I'm going to get fat. And another was this physiologist research, Ansel Keys, who did a lot of research, and a lot of it's like in the 1950s and 60s, a proponent of this diet heart hypothesis, made us think that people who ate more fat, or specifically more saturated fat, were more likely to get heart disease. And it took decades for that to kind of be debunked, to be found not necessarily the case. For one reason, even in this time these debates were going on about fat being so deadly, other researchers, like this man in Britain, John Yudkins, who was an MD and also a researcher, pointed out that as fat increased in our modern diets, sugar tended to go right along with it. So many processed foods are high in fat and high in sugar. So perhaps sugar is really the greater danger than fat. But fat won out kind of as the law of the land. But I think in recent years, more and more people are realizing that fat is not necessarily such a bad thing. Yes, it's calorie dense. You get your 9 calories per gram instead of 4, but it's also more satiating. If you eat a higher percentage of fat and protein, most people report that their appetite is now diminished. They're being nourished more thoroughly, so they don't need to be eating as much and as often. And I found that absolutely myself. Now also, there's kind of another line of research that goes from this man, Weston Price, who's actually a dentist. He wrote a book called, Physical Degeneration in Culture, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, like back in the 30s. He went to all these different cultures around the world, and he looked at people who ate their traditional diets versus people who ate new modern Western diets. And he found in one generation, all these dental problems, malformed teeth, smaller jaws, cavities were found in the people who went to the processed food, who got away from their traditional diets. And oftentimes these traditional diets were higher in fat, though some were also high in healthy, natural carbohydrates. So for a lot of reasons, fat became demonized, but I think that was definitely an unnecessary thing. Oh yeah, and another thing that Price found was that with the fatty foods often come high levels of fat-soluble vitamins, like vitamins A, D, E, and K, that are so important to so many aspects of our body, from our dental health to the health of our gut and virtually every system of our body.
Yeah, I remember reading Gary Taub's book, The Case Against Sugar.
Oh.
And that's yes, quite a dense book for those who want to read it. But it really opened my eyes when, because he talks too, I think pretty extensively. I read it a few years ago about diabetes and sugar, and sugar really has been the culprit behind all this. He even mentioned too, I think, or maybe you did in your book, I forget, about when someone gets like high blood pressure, they mention, lower the salt intake. But I think you or him were arguing that actually no, they found it's probably sugar that's the culprit. It's not necessarily our salt. And I think too, another thing I read was that actually we don't eat enough salt, sodium. But was that you, Kevin? Did you touch on that in your book? I'm sorry if I'm mixing you two up.
Well, I'll tell you, I touched on some of those topics in my book, because I think I cited 4 of Taub's books. Yeah,
yes,
Case Against Sugar, yeah. Good calories, bad calories, The Case for Keto, what was the other one? Oh, Why We Get Fat. So yeah, I found him one of the most, he is currently living, a little bit older than me, modern journalist who just really dug into the history of all these nutritional recommendations. I mean, going back not only 50 years, but hundreds of years. And he's full of those insights. There was another book, I can't remember the title right now, that I cited, but it's by a pharmacist. And it is about rethinking salt intake. And actually, I just had a conversation a couple of days ago with my son, who's a clinical pharmacist at a hospital. I mentioned salt. And he said, oh, yeah. He goes, I've seen some recent studies now, too, like with heart failure patients, where they're rethinking the recommendation to lower salt, which seems to apply actually more to a subset of people. And by some of the impact for many people, of emphasizing more protein and fat, decreasing that carbohydrate, it can have effects too on washing some of the excess water out of our systems, which tends to make our blood pressure go down. Myself, when I changed my diet last year, within 3 months of significantly lowering my carbohydrates and replacing them with natural fats and protein, I remember my blood pressure went from 159/91 to 124/68. So in my own just, unique N of 1 personal case, it made a tremendous difference in my own blood pressure reading, which has stayed within normal limits since then.
And maybe touch on that a little bit too, Kevin, because we mentioned the pyramid a little bit earlier, because carbohydrates was the king for the longest time. So maybe explain, I know we talked about fat a little bit, but maybe explain to our audience as well why, carbohydrates aren't bad in itself, but why maybe an excess of carbs is not, good for us either.
Yeah, and the main reason here, there's a lot of interesting history, but the main reason here is that When you take in a high load of carbohydrate, especially sugar, but other carbohydrate foods eventually break down into sugars. Rises your blood sugar. Your body usually just has 4 or 5 grams of sugar circulating around at one time. But if you drink a can of a cola or some other sweetened drink, you might be getting 40 grams just in that 12-ounce can. So your body's got to do something. It's got to clear these carbohydrates out. And it does that mainly through a hormone, insulin. So your blood sugar rises, insulin comes in to push this blood sugar back down. And the main theory of insulin resistance is if we go too long constantly jacking up that blood sugar, making our bodies pump out these massive amounts of insulin, the different cells in our body, fat cells, muscle cells, the liver, become less responsive to that insulin. So it's not as effective as pushing that blood sugar down. Then we're kind of floating in this blood sugar. It's leading to things like diabetes. So like one measure of diabetes is often used as your blood glucose level. And it's possible for some people, your blood glucose level may stay at a good range, for years or even decades, but maybe because your body's consistently pumping out increasing levels of insulin to cope with it. Then finally, when that system breaks down, okay, now my blood sugar is out of control, but that might have been building up over a period of years because we normally don't test directly for insulin itself. So it's a complicated process. And not to say, and different people have different tolerances for how much carbohydrate they can handle. And I should say too, and I wrote about this in earlier books because I read it, some authorities recommend you get at least 120 or 30 grams of carbohydrate a day, because that's about what it takes to fuel our brains. Our brains like glucose, and they use about 120, 30 grams a day. But actually, it's been found that carbohydrate is not essential to the life, even to the brain, because our body is able to produce that glucose from protein and from fat. So we've had many cases of different cultures, different Arctic explorers who've lived years or even their whole lives without really taking in any significant carbohydrate, but they can maintain robust physical and mental health because of this capacity of what's called gluconeogenesis, where the body can generate carbohydrate. So yeah, I guess I should say the message here too is not, no, carbohydrates are evil, but that different people can tolerate different amounts, and we don't necessarily need to focus on that old pyramid where everything should be based on 6 to 11 servings of grains a day. Personally, right now, for the last couple of years, I probably had less than 50 or 60 grams of carbohydrate per day. And for me, most of that comes from nuts, berries, and vegetables.
So for our audience, Kevin, so what exactly is like 120 grams of carbs? Is it, I know you mentioned nuts too. Is it like a handful, 2 handfuls? So say for nuts, for instance, how many nuts would you have to eat to get to like 120 grams of carbohydrates?
If it was just nuts, you're going to have to eat a whole lot of them. You're going to eat so many that are going to make you sick. I mean, I'm thinking for what a half, so I have like nuts. I'll have like a quarter to half a cup of pistachios maybe, or I'll have 1 tablespoon of peanut butter. And if I'm having a natural peanut butter, what's it have in carbohydrate? I'm thinking like maybe, somewhere between 5 and 7 per tablespoon. So it's going to take a lot of foods like that, or you're going to eat more broccoli than you could possibly ever eat to get that. And yet, if you have 3 cans of soda each day, or if you have a can of soda and you have a couple glasses of orange juice, you can hit that 120, because that can of soda has about 40 by itself. So 3 12-ounce cans of soda, you've hit 120 carbs right there with nothing but that soda.
Empty calories, as they like to call them. So
that's right. That's right, because you're getting this without nutrition.
Right. So maybe people hear this and they go, okay, I understand. Don't load up on carbs and maybe eat more fat. But isn't say someone out there who wants to lose weight, and so isn't it the old adage, more calories in more calories out versus more calories in? Does that still apply nowadays, or has that also been debunked in the research that you've done?
Yeah, that's a thing we have to carefully think about, because for many decades people said, yeah, you want to lose weight, then you have to eat less and move more. Fewer calories in, more calories out. But it seems to be a little bit more complex because people have known that for decades, but it's so hard to lose weight. And most people who do lose weight, boom, they gain it all back. I heard people say like that Biggest Loser show, they don't have reunion shows, because these people put that back on. So it's kind of more complicated than that. People who talk more about the hormonal theory of obesity, of why we get fat, would point out that if people who are obese or who are fat, if they're eating too much, if they're not exercising very much, perhaps that is because the kinds of food they are eating make them hungrier and give them less energy to exercise. So perhaps, some say that we're not lazy because we're fat, but we're not fat because we're lazy because we're fat. Or in a sense that it's not just gluttony and sloth. It's not just, I'm eating everything in sight. And I'm not doing anything. Many people who are overweight, they work hard to try to limit what they eat. They try to go out there and exercise on a regular basis, but it doesn't seem to help because just in a general way, if you drastically increase your exercise, your body's natural mechanism is to get hungrier, to supply the energy that you need. Some people will say, if you're going to have a grand feast some evening for supper and you want to eat as much of this, marvelous food as you possibly can, what might you do? Well, maybe you're going to skip your breakfast or lunch. You're not going to eat as much. And maybe you're going to go out and walk 10 miles. You're going to exercise a lot. So in other words, we kind of recognize at this level that if you don't eat enough and you exercise a whole lot, that's going to make you very, very hungry. So the idea behind the hormonal model is you're going to try to eat food that is nutritionally dense, especially in protein and fat and vitamins and minerals. So that little bit is going to satisfy you. So you're not going to be as hungry and you're going to be more energetic. You're not going to be bloated. Your joints aren't going to ache from inflammation. So you're more likely just to naturally get out there and move more. And again, I have found in my case, this really worked. I mean, all my life I've been involved in strength training, cardiovascular training. But when I was 60 years old, I celebrated that day by deadlifting 410 pounds for 5 repetitions, which I was pretty pleased with. I know strength is important as you get older. But as I note in the book, I weighed 220 pounds. My waistline was 40 inches. My blood pressure was high and my joints ached. Well, when I changed my diet right after that, I dropped 30 pounds. My blood pressure dropped about 30 points. My waist dropped 6 inches. And it was because of this phenomenon, because what I was eating was now satisfying me. So I didn't even feel the urge to eat as much. And I gladly moved more. I didn't increase my lifting or cardiovascular exercise that much, but I just had much more energy for the normal activities of daily life.
Yeah. And I did want to ask you too, Kevin. So I know a big thing when I was in high school, so I was, 10, 15 years ago, was eating 5 to 6 small meals a day is better than the 3 meals a day that we used to eat. So maybe talk about that a little bit, because I know in your book you kind of debunk that as well. So maybe explain to our audience why that probably, for some people, obviously it works. I think you mentioned your wife, she actually feels better when she eats, 5 or 6 smaller meals. So maybe explain for probably the vast majority of people, eating 3 meals is actually better than the 5 to 6 smaller meals.
Yes. And when I grew up, especially immersed in the bodybuilding world, that was what was preached. Like don't go like 2 or 3 waking hours without feeding your body. I remember seeing a seminar by this absolute top flight Mr. Universe winner. And he said, that's what I do. I let my engine run on empty. I fuel it up and then it gets low. I give it a little bit more fuel. So I keep all those nutrients flowing throughout the day. So in the bodybuilding world, that was part of the rationale. You're constantly pumping in what your body needs to grow. Also, even in just the world of normal people and nutritional advice, it was often recommended you eat your 3 meals, but plan a snack, plan a couple snacks so you don't get too hungry and eat too much between those meals. So it's very common practice, even for people losing weight. And again, as you said, some people can successfully do this. There's individual differences here. But here's one of the drawbacks. And one of the main authors in this field is, there's a Catholic author, J. Richards. There's also this nephrologist, Jason Fung, who wrote the Obesity Code, the Diabetes Code. And he's pointing out, kind of like the old wisdom that our grandmas might have given, eat your three square meals and don't snack in between. He said there was a lot of sense to that because every time we eat, it stimulates the blood glucose and our insulin comes and kicks in. So if you're eating, throughout the day, you're kind of constantly getting these rises and drops. But if you just eat 3 meals a day, you're going to get a significant rise, and then your body gets to rest for a while. Then you have another rise. There's another rest period, another rise, and you're going to sleep all night. So many people now recommend eating less frequently, 3 square meals a day. Some people find themselves even going to 2 meals, or even kind of extreme sometimes 1 meal a day. My own adaptation there was I did move to the 3 meals a day. I have only one snack, but it's kind of an appetizer. It precedes my supper. And actually this summer, I kind of naturally evolved to most days just doing 2 meals a day. I'd eat a breakfast after a workout, and it would be pretty substantial, a lot of protein, a lot of fat, a lot of nutrients. And then I would just, by nature, I'm not a big fan of lunch, so I would skip lunch and then just eat a very, very hearty supper. But by doing that, then you're giving your body more time to rest and more time between those insulin surges. So again, it's an individual difference thing. Myself now, most days I do eat a breakfast, a lunch, and a supper, and some days I just skip that lunch myself.
Yeah, I know you mentioned Dr. Jason Fung, and he also wrote a book on intermittent fasting, which introduced me to that topic. And I know you touch on fasting too in your book. So I did want to ask you about that because that's such a hugely spiritual exercise I think we overlook, especially in our day and age now where fasting is just kind of almost forgotten about. But I mean, I guess we'll talk about it in a spiritual sense in a little bit, but maybe just talk about the vast health benefits that fasting can bring for those maybe who are struggling with weight loss or struggling with diabetes and all these other diseases that you mentioned in your book.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and Jason Fung writes wonderful books about the power of intermittent fasting. So part of the idea there too, like with reducing the carbs, is to reduce those insulin bursts. Well, another way to do that is by spacing your meals further apart. So your body has more time to rest, to do a process called autophagy, where your body kind of takes care of and gets rid of dead cells and kind of renews itself. So we get a little bit of this fasting every night, through we call our first morning meal breakfast, which of course literally means break the fast that you had for these hours while you're sleeping. So some of these modern experts recommend that we can increase that time period with positive effects. Now myself, I do that just in a very minor way. I usually stop eating now most days at about 5:30 p.m. And I usually don't eat the next day till after my workout at about 7:30 a.m. So I do about a 14-hour, break between those meals. And then I do the little fasts during the day by not snacking between my meals. But it can have a lot of positive effects for a lot of people. Some people will even go, longer fasts, going in like a 24-hour fast, they'll eat supper, then they might skip the next day's breakfast and lunch and go back to supper. Sometimes people will even do occasionally longer ones. Some people who are really battling with obesity find positive effects from this, and with diabetes, as Dr. Fung writes about. Again, it's an individual difference thing. If a person was going to try longer fasts, especially if you had medical problems, and for any of this, you probably want to be in contact with your doctor. Because especially if you're taking medications like blood pressure medications or insulin medications, if you make these dietary changes in drastically reducing your carbohydrates or even spacing your meals, it's going to impact that. And you may need to alter your medications. But just in general, yeah, intermittent fasting or just time-restricted eating, I'm seeing more and more people noticing those positive effects. And myself, I thought it at first, because coming from that bodybuilding background, I was like, if I'm not taking in protein, my muscles are shrinking, and I don't want that. So I remember I knew some young guys at the gym who were fasting before they did heavy lifting in the morning. I thought, man, you're nuts. Well, here I am now. I do my weight training every day in a fasted state from the night before. I've had water and coffee, and I feel great. My workouts are just fine because I don't need that quick sugar energy. I'm using my body's fat stores and the glycogen that's already been stored up in the muscles, and I just replenish afterwards. But yeah, wonderful physical, and then also mental. Even some people say they have a greater mental sharpness, and I notice this myself. If I have to go do a talk or something, I used to always think, oh gosh, I'm going to make sure I'm going to eat something an hour or two before that, so I'm not in a haze. Well, now eating this way, I'm fresher if I've gone many hours since my last meal before I have to do some, demanding intellectual task.
Yeah, I know some fasting too. They recommend stopping coffee, and I said I am not stopping my coffee intake. And I know in your book, I appreciated that about you, Kevin, where you said, some people recommend stopping. I'm not taking away my coffee. So we're on the same page with that one. I appreciate that about you.
Oh, well, I appreciate that too, because, I read a lot of people in this field. And some people who are like pure carnivores, and so and they won't even do coffee. Other people say, yeah, we have to live life too. If you love your coffee, and if it's not having ill effects on your health. And like I was able to lose all this weight and get all these benefits while I was drinking coffee. Now, I admit I usually drink it black. A lot of times I'll treat myself to one coffee with cream each day. But I think with all this too is, God wants us to take care of our bodies. He also wants to have some joy and the simple pleasures in life. Yeah, and for me, coffee is one of those. So I haven't given up coffee.
Well, I appreciate that about you. So how many cups would you say you drink a day? I know this is a bit of a sidetrack, but I am interested.
I guess I should be honest, huh? No, I probably, if I'm really busy, I'm working, I'm writing a new book, I'm doing podcasts and things. There are times I'll drink up to 5 cups a day.
Okay.
I kind of think my ideal is when I'm toning down, I try to keep it to 3. And sometimes I will sneak in also maybe a decaf. Like if I'm having the one with cream, I can usually get by having just a decaf if it's the one that has cream in it. But my normal intake is about 3 to 5 cups of black coffee a day.
So I know this is
what's
not
yours, James?
That's a great question. So I usually do about 3. Lately, as increased because my youngest son hasn't been sleeping well, so I'll add in a 4th cup sometimes. But I did want to ask you. I know this is not in your book, and we're kind of tangenting a little bit, but have you done research on the benefits of coffee, or maybe the bad parts of coffee as well? But we can just talk about the good parts of coffee and just leave the bad parts to the side.
Well, it's really interesting that you asked me that, because I did a podcast just a few weeks ago, and I was sitting here, and it was in the morning, and instead of my water, I had some coffee with me. Mm-hmm. And for some reason, I just thought, I'm going to go on the internet and do a search about that, because I read over the years so many conflicting messages about, is coffee good for you, bad for you, whatever. And I just remember the morning I did that, the first page comes up with a variety of studies and articles on why coffee is good for you, a few on why coffee is bad for you, and some on why it's basically neutral. So my bottom line was, there's no real clear-cut evidence. I know I see a lot of studies that talk about different possible positive effects, but these are usually correlational studies, just what people happen to be drinking. As far as I don't really know. Well, I imagine they're probably out there, but I'm not aware myself of particular experimental studies where they sat different groups and gave them certain amount of coffees and saw what happened. I'm not sure about that. But for me, the lesson here is that I try to apply is that N of 1, where the number of subjects in your study is yourself. And myself, at this point in my life, I notice no ill effects from it, so I'm not going to slow down. If I got to feel where, hey, I'm not controlling my weight anymore, or hey, my blood pressure seems to be going up, then I would consider readjusting my coffee intake. But at this point, I don't know any reason to do that.
Amen to that. Maybe that can be your 26th book, Kevin. You can write about coffee and all the benefits of it. If you need another topic for your own research. So, okay.
So my wife got me this little.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, my wife got me this thing for my little whiskey bar, this little towel, and it says, coffee in the morning, whiskey in the afternoon. So maybe that could be the book, a part 1 on coffee and a part 2 on the old-fashions.
I would love that, and I would gladly have you back on for that conversation once that book is written. So I do want to touch on fitness in a bit, but before we shift gears here, I did want to say, so for all of our men out there or women who are listening, it's like, okay, maybe this is information they have never heard and you're just, constantly blowing their minds right now. So would you say kind of your top 3 very small changes that they could make today, just to give them as much kind of bang for their buck, so to speak, that can be easily applied today?
Oh, that's a very good one. Okay, so three. I'd say one, eat real foods, by which I mean foods that don't have a label or an ingredient list, like, like an orange, like a piece of broccoli, like a sirloin steak, like some eggs, like some real butter. So eat real food as much as you can. So, which the flip side is avoid all those processed packaged foods that have been manufactured. Number two, I would say probably decrease your sugar. And the flip side of that would be replace it with high quality real food, protein and fat. So the real food, the sugar. The third, I might be to say, and again, these all kind of tie together, watch your intake of the industrial seed oils. These are products that didn't exist over 100 years ago, and they're in most of these processed foods. So say, watch your intake of fat from those oils, but then maybe the flip side of that is don't be too fearful of naturally occurring fats that humans have ate forever, like the kinds of fats that come in meat, that come in eggs, that come in whole fat dairy, that come in coconuts and olives and things like that. So yeah, I guess in three then, eat real food, reduce your sugar, and reduce your industrial fats.
For that, would you say things like soybean oil or like grapeseed oil, things like that, those those vegetable fats? Is that what you mean?
That is what I mean. And these are controversial topics. There's certain health authors think these are even more detrimental than sugars are. I read Dr. Kate Stranahan is one that talks about a lot about this. There's some others. And just in my own personal experience, again, this is just the N of one. I have found that when I take in products that have those kind of oils, the soybean oil, cottonseed oil, canola oil, which is really rapeseed oil, but it came from Canada, so they thought Canada oil sounded a little better. Canola, they're another man-made oil. But I found that when I eat those, I can tell it. I feel bloated, or my stomach doesn't feel right. So myself, I have a fair amount of fat each day, but it mostly comes from things like butter, coconut oil, cream, the kind of oils that naturally occur in foods.
Is that honestly where canola oil came from?
Yeah. It actually comes from something called not grapeseed, but this is something called rapeseed. And I thought that doesn't sound too appetizing, but it comes primarily from Canada, so they called it canola. Canadian oil, basically. And it's not been around for that long, but that's a whole story of its own, how they make these oils, because they're from the seeds of these vegetables. They have to put them through high temperature, high pressure. They said they really have a stink. They deodorize them. They chemically bleach them. So all kinds of stuff comes into play before they come onto your plate. So very, very different from something they've been doing with olives for thousands of years and just pressing them flat and getting the oil run out, or from coconuts, similar processes there. But yeah, I just personally found that I can tell if I get those oils, I just don't feel as good.
Yeah. Gosh. Yeah. I remember reading that in your book. They like chemical bleaching of the oils. Like, yeah, that sounds healthy. Let's bleach our oil and then put it in our bodies. And no wonder we don't feel good. So, I did lie. So I did want to touch back on the first thing you mentioned is eating real food, versus processed. So why is that so important, especially when everything seems to be processed in our grocery stores?
Well, yeah, the real foods tend to be far more nutrient dense. In a lot of the processed foods, they strip out natural nutrients and also fiber, like in breads. They talk about enriched flour because they milled out all the natural bran, the natural fiber, the natural vitamins. Then they've had to enrich it with man-made added things like the B vitamins. So these real foods, they're much more nutritionally dense. And I'm sorry, I'm getting tired. The second part of the other aspect of your question was?
Why is processed food so bad for us, especially since it's so prevalent in our grocery stores?
Right. Yeah. Right. Okay. So again, processed food is bad because it's often stripped of nutrients, and partly because of that, they make us hungry. We eat more and more to satisfy our nutrient needs. I cite a book in my book called Salt, Sugar, Fat by a researcher who showed how manufacturers very carefully put sugar to give us something called this bliss point. Fat gives us what they call this mouth feel. Salt gives us this flavor burst. So they engineer these foods so we want more and more. And because they don't have the nutrients we need, we're going to eat more and more of them. But I will note too that I talked about this rise in obesity in adults and also in kids and adolescents. And in 1995, this is an article produced in the Journal of the American Medical Association, the JAMA, one of the most prestigious. I think they said in 1999, about 61% of the foods eaten by American children and adolescents, 61% was ultra-processed food. This packaged stuff in the center aisles of the grocery store instead of fruits and vegetables and dairy and meat and so on. By 2014, 15 years later, it had risen even further to 67%. So over 2/3 of the foods that our children and adolescents eat are now these processed foods rather than basic old, real foods that you could pick or grow. And again, along with this increase has come these massive increases in things like obesity, diabetes, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So I say, if you're eating more and more real foods, you're going to get more fiber, you're going to get more vitamins, you're going to likely be more satisfied, and you're not going to be constantly driven to eat more and more.
Well, thank you for all that. I hope this has been helpful for everyone listening here. So, but I do want to shift gears a little bit. I know nutrition is the primary focus of this book, but you do talk about fitness as well. So I do want to touch base on that before we wrap up here. So, and I know you've written books on fitness before. I know you participate in bodybuilding in the past. So just kind of summarize, why is fitness so important for us? I mean, isn't it important? I mean, you talk about eating well, our spiritual life is, or we're praying and things like that. But why is physical fitness? Why is it something that is a passion of yours, and why do we even need it?
Yeah, of course, Paul tells us our bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit. So we're going to glorify God through our bodies. And we're also called, to share our love with everyone, to love God with all that we are, even our bodies, our hearts, and our strength, and our soul, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. And St. Thomas Aquinas tells us, when we're told to love ourselves, that includes our body, because our body is an integral part of ourself. We're body, soul, composite. So it's important to take care of that body. The better we take care of our body too, the more likely we are to have the energy to go out and actually do good works for other people, to do, we talk about corporal works of mercy, things we do for people's actual physical upkeep. We're going to have a better capacity to do that. Also, throughout the entire lifespan, if we do take better care of our body, we're less likely to succumb to disease. And in my own background, I know you have working with a lot of geriatrics. And in my doctoral work, I was at an Alzheimer's center. And I also worked a lot with volunteers, elderly volunteers who were healthy, but we were just trying to find out what went on with their minds as they aged. And then now myself, as the decades are going by, I'm more and more interested in trying to maintain both physical and mental, vigor as we get older, to retain our powers of memory and thinking and language and so on. And lots of research shows that physical fitness correlates with our cognitive, our mental capacities. And in particular, especially in working with the elderly, they talk about like biomarkers, things we can measure that will predict how functional a person will be later in life. And two of the most powerful ones for decades have actually been physical strength and muscle mass. So as we get in our later decades of life, the stronger we are, the more muscle mass we have, the less likely we are to have functional limitations, to be unable to walk, or to fall and therefore to break our hips because our muscles haven't been built, our bones haven't been strengthened through exercise. So I just find that exercise is important all through the lifespan, and particularly strength resistance exercise, building our physical strength, and even more so perhaps in the last decades of our lives.
Yeah, I know fitness too. We could talk about all the health benefits of it. Just just the mental energy that you get, and obviously you talked about the biggest biomarkers are physical strength and muscle mass too. So maybe touch on because I'm sure everyone's heard about, okay, you need to exercise, you need to lift weights and things like that. But so what would you say 'Cause I know a lot of dads listen to this podcast too, and someone like me who has young kids, and then okay, I go to work, and then I'm trying to balance time with my kids versus work versus eating healthy. I don't have time to fit in. So what would you say to those who maybe struggle with I don't have an hour a day to go to the gym to work out to make fitness a huge part of my life?
Oh, that is a wonderful question that I can really relate to, because back in the day, I was a young and very busy father, myself. Our church is so full of wisdom. I have several quotes from Pope Pius XII in there. And in one, he says, the Catholic Church is all in favor of physical culture, taking care of the body, if it's kept in proper proportion. And then I kind of bullet point some things he means by that. And one is that it doesn't drain you and it doesn't take you away from other important responsibilities in your life. But for me, the good news in this book, and it was also back when I wrote Fit for Eternal Life in 2007, is that at least as far as the strength training, there are surprisingly simple methods that the person can use to significantly build or maintain their muscular strength with as little as one training session per week. Half an hour. I did this myself for many years in my busiest years of my life in my 30s and 40s, where I had limited time to train. I had many weeks where I lifted only one day a week, but I did it hard. I did it intensely. But those workouts were very, very brief. After warm-ups, I would just do one set where I would not necessarily fail, but it would come close to it. And then each week I would try to surpass what I did. So I think the good news there is there are safe, simple methods of strength training that can take as little as one training session a week, a half an hour. There's also methods you may have come across called super slow. They're methods that were first developed with older people with osteoporosis, where you do an exaggeratedly slow range of motion, possibly between 5 and 10 seconds to raise a weight, another 5 or 10 seconds to lower the weight. So you eliminate momentum, you eliminate the need to use such a heavy weight, and you can stimulate your muscles, very quickly and very intensely without doing damage to the joint and taking very little time. One set like that will typically take between 1 or 2 minutes. And if you go through a workout where you're going to do maybe one overhead pushing motion, maybe a pulling down motion, maybe a chest pressing motion, then maybe a rowing motion, something for your legs like a leg press. If you do even as few as those 5 exercises, you've pretty much trained all the major muscles of your body, and you can make a huge difference over baseline. The difference between doing something like that once a week and doing nothing is just absolutely immense. Now, it may not be ideal, and now I'm an old retired guy. I work out several times a week because I enjoy it. But you can, if necessary, if you can invest a half an hour a week, even if you have to do it in your own house with body weight exercises, in my opinion, it can be very much worth your while.
Oh, absolutely. And I actually had not heard about the super slow training. I mean, I've heard of, like hold for a second or two, maybe at the bottom of the set and then really, explode out of it, things like that. But that was really interesting reading that in your book about the, extended slow release. And because like you said, you totally lose momentum, and it's training that muscle under stress, how to respond appropriately. And I know too, you mentioned, 30 minutes a week, I think that's something we can all, fit into our schedule. We mentioned HIIT workouts too, high intensity interval training, and then the Tabata workout as well. And your research as well, what have you found in benefits of, the Tabata or the HIIT workouts as well?
It's interesting because I'm just rereading this old newsletter I used to get called Master Trainer, where they're like about 20 years ago, they were investing all this when it was kind of new. These new methods of the high intensity interval training. That Tabata was a very intense, very brief protocol from a Japanese researcher early on. And the idea was that, for your aerobics or cardio or endurance exercise, you don't necessarily have to just do moderate, steady state. You can get a lot of benefits by doing briefer, harder periods of exercise followed by either rest or a lower intensity level, and then kind of repeat that. And I find for myself now, when I do the cardiovascular type training, that's typically what I'll do. I may warm up for 4 or 5 minutes and then do 3 or 4 cycles where I'll do either a minute hard, a minute easy, or sometimes it might be 30 seconds harder and a minute and a half easy, or or 2 minutes moderately hard and a minute or two easy, but just a variety of ways that you can. Your workout, typically if I do this, I just do it like 15 minutes on an exercise bike, 5-minute warm up, 5 minutes where I'm doing these hard intervals, and maybe 5 minutes cooling down or something like that. But my own experience is that it can go a long way of maintaining cardiovascular fitness and helping us feel good, whether you're doing it on a bicycle or a treadmill, whatever piece of equipment you're doing, or even if you're out, running or walking.
And Kim, what would you say too? Because I've heard this sort of objection. I mean, maybe not to fitness in general, but like the fitness industry is very much, a secular world. Especially you see all the fitness models and stuff, and especially women, they're hardly wearing anything, and the men obviously are shirtless. And so, I guess what would you say for those who maybe an objection would be? I don't want to go to the gym because I see people and they're hardly dressed. And, I just feel like the culture itself of fitness is not something that squares with the Catholic faith. I know you touched about that too with St. Pius XII in his quotes, which I had not heard about those quotes from him. So I loved reading those in your book. So thank you for adding those.
Yeah, you're most welcome. In this book, Youre at Temple, I conclude with these 23 stories called Temple Tender Tales from people who are out there now who are Catholics, who've been involved in the fitness world in one way or another. I remember there's one story from a mom there. I think she's mom. Oh gosh, she's like 9 kids who was a very devout Catholic. Who kind of one of her sons encouraged her to actually go into bodybuilding, which she felt very, very hesitant about at first. But I would say, yeah, it is true that much of the gym culture is not in proportion. To many people, it is a worship of their body. And some people are going there to dress inappropriately, and it can be a source of temptation. So if a person was finding this distressing, leading them towards impure thoughts, then they might want to find another place to work out, another time to go to that gym, perhaps. You may be able to find a time you can go where this isn't happening, or train at your home. But just the fact of taking care of the body, itself, if you're displaying it modestly, there should be nothing at all to disregard our Catholic faith there, because I think there's another Pope Pius XII quote, something about the human body being the masterpiece of God's creation. It's not like we need to strip off our clothes and show everybody, hey, look at this masterpiece I built. No, that's not what we're saying, of course. But the body, it is beautiful. But I say too, for most of us training, if our bodies do look nicer, and they're going to over time to some extent, but I like to think that's more like a pleasant side effect. It shouldn't be our main goal. I think our main goal should be function. We are stronger, more resilient. Perhaps it'll improve our health, make us more. So I say focus more on the function, let the form be more of a side effect. So hopefully we can all find a way to do that. But again, if a person's finding, really temptations to sin by the fact that they're going to a gym environment or something, I'd say, then don't do that. And I should say too, I should warn people that the modern competitive bodybuilding culture, especially for men, you need to be very, very leery about that, because at the higher levels, it's highly saturated with the use of steroids, growth hormone, even insulin, these other things. So unfortunately, what decades ago was an extremely healthy and natural activity of bodybuilding, before this modern drug era came in, now many people who are just astoundingly muscular developed may be in horrible shape on the inside. So we don't want to emulate that. We only want to use the hormones that God has naturally given us.
Yeah, and I guess one final question I have for you, Kevin, because I really appreciated this about you, is that you added a chapter for those maybe who are disabled, and you mentioned the saint. Oh my gosh, I'm totally blanking on her name. Saint Margaret, patron saint of
Castello.
Thank you. So tell me, I guess, what made you want to include that chapter? Because for me, it really meant a lot that you added that chapter, because some people might be reading your book and say, that's great, but maybe I can't do that, or it's just not feasible for me. So I guess what made you, what was your thought process about adding that chapter in particular?
Well, sure. Yeah, when I first wrote a Catholic book that dealt in faith and fitness issues, Fit for Eternal Life, one of my key themes was how the virtues apply. And one of the cardinal virtues is justice, giving each person their rightful due. I thought, well, how does that apply to fitness? Well, like fortitude, doing hard things. Well, yeah, that's lifting weights and running and so forth. Temperance, reining in your diet. Oh, that makes sense. Prudence, maybe putting this all together in a practical way. But what about justice? I thought, well, how about we try to make sure we give the rightful due to special groups of people who may have special needs? So I'd written about like younger people and older people and women's needs. But in this book, too, reflecting, too, on my years as a disability adjudicator, yeah, I realized that, yeah, there are people out there, and I don't want to be giving the message that we have to be these, amazing physical specimen to please God with our bodies. What if we have significant disabilities, musculoskeletal problems, neurological problems, whatever the case may be? Well, our bodies are still temples of the Holy Spirit. We can still glorify God through those bodies. If you're paralyzed, you can't do any training whatsoever. Perhaps there's something you do in terms of your diet, trying to see that you're fed nutritious foods. If you can't even do that, perhaps, or if you're older, you're very, very limited. Maybe you can learn about proper care of the body and try to teach some of that to your grandkids or younger people you have in contact with. So no matter how physically impaired we are, there are great things we can do using our bodies as instruments. And that one saint I gave, she's kind of like a Catholic equivalent of Helen Keller, who did so much because though she was blind and deaf and mute, this great saint was born all deformed, and her parents actually locked her in a room for years. Later, she's in a room outside of a church, but she became a great saint. Despite being blind and hunched and a dwarf, she reached out to other people and ministered to their needs, to people who were acutely sick or acutely poor. So the one message I wanted to include with that chapter is, regardless of the actual state of our physical bodies, they're still beautiful. They're still holy temples. We can still honor God through them.
Yeah, leave it to a saint to really put things into perspective for you. And she was certainly one of those examples as well. Well, Kevin, I certainly have taken up enough of your time, and we'll have to have you back on. This has been a pleasant conversation, and tell our audience, where to find you, learn more about you, your other books, and especially this book. And again, that's You Are That Temple, a Catholic Guide to Health and Holiness.
Yeah, well, thanks, James. I would love to come back again and talk about other things. This particular book, You Are That Temple, is from Sophia Institute Press, my main publisher. I think it's sophiainstitute.com. You can find it there and also through other sellers. My own website is drvost.com. It's drvost.com. I will admit I do not update it regularly. Not all of my books are there. And I don't sell my books from that site. But there is a comment box on the bottom. So if people want to talk to me, make a comment, ask me a question, I'll respond to that. So just drvost.com, drvost.com.
Perfect. And everyone listening, I will include all of these links in the show notes as well. So it's easy. You can just click on them and go right to Kevin's website, also Sophia Institute Press, where you can find all of Kevin's books as well. Well, Kevin, thank you again so much for coming on. Really appreciate your time and knowledge that you brought. Again, I read this book and I loved it, and I highly recommend it to all those, especially those who are interested in maybe getting a little bit more healthy. You're not sure where to start. Again, Kevin does a great job breaking down the science behind nutrition, kind of the old adages that we kind of debunked here today. He breaks it down into further detail, obviously, in his book, but makes it into an easy to digest format for all of you. So, Kevin, thank you again for writing this, and thanks again for coming on.
Well, you're most welcome, James. It's been my pleasure and honor to be on the Manly Catholic Podcast.
Well, men and women who listen, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Manly Catholic, and go out there and be a saint.